One. Welcome back, viewers, to a new year, another episode of Across the Pond, a podcast with Martin Cullip and myself from the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. If you follow this, you know that we interview people across the globe because Martin is in the UK and I'm in Florida. And so we're excited to introduce a person in India today joining the show and everything. So today I have Samrat Chowdhery, who is a journalist and harm reduction activist that's based in Mumbai, India, and he has focused on the impact of tobacco harm reduction products with a detailed attention to lower middle income countries, are otherwise known as LMICs. Samrat, thanks for coming on. Thanks for being the first guest this year. Martin, you can say hello too.
Yeah, hello, Sam. It's nice to see you. I've done broadcasts with you before, haven't I, at Warsaw and stuff? So it's great to see
Yeah,
you. Yeah, do you want to start? Do you want to just introduce yourself? Because I know you and Lindsay knows you, but just to our viewing public, just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background, how you got into THR and all that kind of thing.
okay. Well, hi, Lindsay. Hi, Martin. Thank you for inviting me to the show. I hope you can hear me, and I'm sorry if my video is not that good. So I've been involved in advocacy, consumer advocacy for safer alternative for about a decade now, and it began with me switching from smoking and heavy smoking to successfully, after a lot of trying NRTs and other kind of therapies, even local remedies, and then finally managing to quit with vaping. And then this was also the time when the Indian government started acting on vaping, and there were state bans, and then we decided to organize, and which is how we managed to end up uh, forming a consumer organization in India. And I believe it's one of the oldest registered, consumer THR organizations in Asia. Of course, we had inspiration from NNA and the US organization, and then we thought it would be easy in a country like India where there is such high rates of smoking, and there is a safer alternative. The government doesn't provide enough. Doesn't have the resources to provide public health care. So, in the absence of any recourse to handling the outcomes of long-term tobacco use, the government would look at prevention measures seriously, and it would be not. It would be an easy sell, But little did we know that there are a lot of dynamics at play. The government itself, uh, owns a third of the tobacco monopoly. It also controls tobacco cultivation. So there are a lot of dynamics, and then there's WHO and the foreign NGOs which are also pushing for bans. So we ended up having a ban in 2019, and here we are still fighting a battle. But the number of vapors continue to grow, and yeah, well, and I've been part of it right from the beginning. I helped steer it. I've also had the opportunity to lead a global organization, INCO, first under Julie Wasner, and I was the president for a while. So I've had uh, an opportunity to see consumer advocacy on a global scale, and I continue to fight. I'm a soldier in a fight from the consumer perspective.
Yeah, well, we're all soldiers in that fight, aren't we? And I think some people sometimes get a bit war weary with it, but I'm glad you're still around, Samrat. You said it about India. Now, I know a little bit about India, mostly from talking to you, but it's not just a ban they've got in India, have they? They also have a ban on research in India. I mean, they've gone really heavily and viciously against vaping in all its forms, and even I think, isn't it true that you can't hold a conference where you talk about vaping in India as well?
Yeah, so the how Australia is to the west in its like hardcore anti-THR stance. India is to the south, the global south. It has just gone like really deep in its anti-THR stance. It can do things that there are certain things which you cannot do in the West because you have institutions and protections which you can do in the developing world. And also organizations like WHO, they wield a lot of influence, because they fund programs. So they have a seat at the table and they can influence policy. And one of that was, of course, they banned research. So a big question comes up, at the policy table is, do we have local research? But you banned it. So, so you don't have local research. But there are ways around it because the ban is on government institutions or government funded institutions. So you can still have private institution and, they're well recognized private institutions who can do research, but it's difficult to get around, when the government has declared that this is not what they want. It's difficult to convince private institutions to also look into this. And then, yes, David Sweeney was one of the people who was on a panel, and they weren't talking about products. They were talking about safer alternatives to smoking and harmful tobacco use. And that got flagged off as promotion of vaping, so, and then and the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting sort of de facto banned talking about vaping in a positive manner. So yeah, it's gone deep, and I've written about it. It is quite serious, but there is the other side that, while they can do this, they also cannot enforce this, right? So then, you still have vapes available everywhere, but it's not the way it should happen because we don't know what, there's no quality checks, there's no standards, so we don't know what's in these vapes, who's selling them. All this was supposedly done to protect teens and minors and kids, but now they have even easier access because, the smugglers don't care who they sell.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Absolutely.
when I first heard about that in India, about the research, it just made me think, there's lots of people all over the world who wouldn't like to see drugs legalized, but they never actually go so far as to ban scientific research about the products. And it just made me think, and if you consider the step forwards in vaping are always these big research items which come out with things like vaping is at least 95% less harmful than smoking. These are the things that have harmed the other side. And it just made me think, are they scared of something? Is this why they banned research, do you think?
Yeah, well, you have to. So there are two interests colluding, right? And these were supposed to be opposing interests. So one is the tobacco industry, and one is the anti-tobacco groups. And they're supposed to be in a battle against each other. But here in India, they have formed some sort of a confluence. I call it the perfect storm, because on one hand, the tobacco industry has its interests. The government is part of the tobacco industry. It controls the entire supply chain, including being part, like owning a third of the tobacco monopoly. And then you have the anti-tobacco groups with the same message. So, the government just says, oh, yeah, we want to protect the kids. So therefore, we that allows us to take extreme measures. So, I mean, it is the safest way to prevent any policy making to happen in the future because you're banning research, you're banning the media from talking about it. So you have it. Everyone wins. The tobacco industry is happy because they can continue to sell cigarettes. Now there is a huge debate in the West about flavors, but here in India, the cigarettes are being launched in new flavors every other day. So while on one hand you've banned the safest way of inhaling nicotine, you're launching cigarettes in new flavors. The volume of cigarette sales is going up. The profit of cigarette companies, the local cigarette companies, is going up. ITC has overtaken BAT as the second largest tobacco company in the world, because of the profits it's making, because of this protectionism that it's getting from the government. But it's not helping the people, and who's thinking about them?
I am trying to. Can you talk a little bit more about I told you earlier that I've done some of the numbers, for India. And what I was amazed was you have no data on e-cigarette use from the government coming out, but there's so many types of tobacco, especially. Could you talk a little bit more about gutka, and all of these other type of traditional tobacco that most people in the West are probably unaware of?
Sure. So, the act which controls cigarettes or tobacco in the country is called COTPA, and it's spelled as Cigarettes and Other Tobacco Products Act. So cigarettes was the main focus in policy making, but cigarettes forms just under 11% of overall tobacco use. Even smoking is so for every smoker in this country, there are 2 smokeless tobacco users. Now, the smokeless tobacco comes in many really toxic forms. Leads to about 350,000 deaths a year. So that's Kenny. Kenny is like snus, but it is. It's mixed with a lot of additives, and then you have slake lime. So India has 80% of oral cancers, tobacco-induced oral cancers in the world. So it gives you an indication of how toxic that is. So that has 200 million users of Khaini, that product. And then you have gutka, which is betel nut. Betel nut is sort of a nut which again is carcinogenic, and that's mixed with tobacco. And then you have various. You have snuff, which is tobacco powder, which is inhaled. So yeah, and then everything is flavors form a big part of oral tobacco use here. Uh, and so safer oral nicotine, for example, nicotine pouches or snus could have huge impact in a country like India. Because the way we talk about vaping for smokers, oral safer oral is really adaptable to a country like India. And we have seen in Pakistan how when VAT launched Velo, how quick and rapid the adoption of that was. And I wrote about it, and it can happen in South Asia. And so safer alternatives are available, but there is no willingness and vested interests, and these global NGOs are not helping at all. They're seeing things from a very uh, let's ban this. You cannot ban this, but you're just spreading a lot of misinformation. A lot of Indian doctors think that vaping is more harmful than smoking. I mean, leave alone oral tobacco, we haven't even come to that.
Yeah, shameful. I mean,
Sorry if that was a
I
long
agree with
reply.
Yeah,
But
I agree with you about pouches and things, especially in countries like Africa and those, because you do a lot of talking about low and middle income countries, don't you? And by the WHO's own figures, that they're not our figures, the WHO says that 80% of the world's smokers are in LMICs, and yet they seem to be doing everything they can to stop products being produced for smokers in those countries and try to lower that prevalence of smoking in those countries, don't they?
yeah, and I mean, the entire policy focus is in the global south. And these are the nations which depend on WHO for policy guidance. Not just that, but also for funding. And then when you mix that with the Bloomberg funding, and that translates into millions of dollars, and that's a huge amount of policy pressure, funded policy pressure, coming into these countries, which are anyway very open to uh, a lot of them have stakes in tobacco crop, because for a developing country, tobacco is a cash crop. It is something that they monetize, and this is across the LMIs. So they're already receptive to a message where monopolies have built in. So they want to protect them from substitutes, or they don't want to change. They want to maintain the status quo, and the quality of life, I'm sad to say, is not the same, or the value of life is not the same as it is in the West. Or individual liberties don't matter as much. So a lot of factors come in together, but uh, WHO and the allied groups are putting in a lot of policy pressure, and that is leading to bans where safer alternatives would have made the most difference, because these are the people who cannot afford healthcare, and these are the people whom the government also is unable to provide any healthcare or any support for dealing with the outcomes of long-term tobacco use. So it is quite sad, really, and I'm afraid it's just getting worse with new bans being announced. With the new countries being targeted for pressure, and how overt it's becoming, the whole anti-THR movement in the LMICs.
Yeah, they're pretty much going really hard at the LMICs. For our viewers that don't know, what it was like 2 weeks ago that Vietnam banned the e-cigarettes and nicotine pouches as well. Another thing, though, that there is hope. It just came out that Pakistan is kicking out Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and the other Vital Strategies is a Bloomberg-based group based in the United States for misappropriating of the funds and coming in as an NGO. And I didn't even realize that there's a lot of implications for some of that when it comes to terrorism. Actually, a lot of people forget. Pakistan is where we found Osama bin Laden, and you're coming in here and they're not being transparent about what you're doing with these funds. There is way more global implications to just kids vaping. And it's kind of just amazing to sit here and see some of the stuff coming out, and nobody's really pushing back against it. It's like these countries are like, oh, just come in. Can you kind of explain what happened in India with those groups? I know I was talking to somebody earlier about it, where they kind of got targeted by your own government.
Yeah, well, see, so the Bloomberg Philanthropies, which mainly fund CTFK and Vital Strategies, who are the fund managers for Bloomberg in various regions, including in South Asia. So they come in with lots of money. So, you may recall that Bloomberg Philanthropies pledged about $420 billion. And then, India was one of the countries, Vietnam was one of them, Brazil was one of them, all these countries where you have bans now. And Pakistan, also a lot of money was flowing in through these NGOs in a non-transparent manner. So what they were trying to do was buy the seat at the table by pumping in a lot of money. Of course, there's going to be pushback against that. And Pakistan banned both CTFK and Vital Strategies, whereas in India, the funding for CTFK was restricted, which means that it's not an outright ban, but it's a de facto ban because they cannot spend any money without consulting the government. So which is more or less a ban, because the government wouldn't allow them to spend money on influencing policy and pushing for bans. But Vital Strategies continues to operate, and we filed a public a request for public information. I don't know what it's called in your country, but it's called RTI, Right to Information Request here. And we found that Vital Strategies is sitting at top level meetings with the government. So while Philippines, as you know, really went after them in a big way and really called out that funding. So the awareness is growing, but I don't know if it's growing fast enough. For example, in Brazil, the mandate for the organization there, the Bloomberg funded organization there, was to push and ensure that the ban stays. So with such overt mandates, countries should really sit up and start taking notice about this, because it's neither helping. It's not helping the people at all. What it's doing is it's creating black markets, it's creating criminality, it's changing the way people would engage normally with these products, which is through a legal system. There would be quality control. Now you have disposables which are being sold to kids, and it's just making everything worse.
What worries me really is, as we know it, because it's an open secret. I don't think they even hide it, that Bloomberg funded organizations are stomping all over the world trying to basically buy the governments in that country and trying to sort of write their policies for them. They've been caught out in other countries before. And this is with the full support and indulgence of the World Health Organization. They do nothing to stop this. And considering we're now having the WHO fighting a sort of like a rearguard action against people saying we shouldn't allow the WHO to take our sovereignty in our countries, why is the WHO allowing this? Because this obviously just gives all those people perfect ammunition to attack the WHO and say they don't care if they take people's sovereignty, because they're already doing it when it comes to tobacco policy.
Yeah, and I find this to be a huge paradox in public health generally, because while there is this whole movement towards becoming more and more and aggressively anti-industry, because the FCTC was formed to reduce tobacco use and save lives, right? But now it's an anti-industry group. It's everything that it's publishing or talking about is how do we prevent multinational tobacco companies. It's not about people anymore. So on one hand, they're becoming more and more anti-industry, On the other hand, they're becoming more and more beholden to Bloomberg and Gates foundations who are writing their policy, right? Who, when the tobacco report comes out from the WHO, the foreword is by Michael Bloomberg. So while they're getting more and more beholden to private money, and they're becoming more, so it's just money playing money, I mean, uh, and see, WHO has lost credibility in a lot of, I mean, the pandemic really hit them hard. Um, so I don't know what forces or what's is it the old thinking that okay, we cannot trust this is a ploy of the tobacco industry and we cannot trust them, but there's enough science to prove that these products are safer. So I mean I don't see the reluctance. Uh, there have to be some monetary motives, and I think we can point fingers at Bloomberg, who may have been convinced that this is the right way. And if all your tobacco control money is coming from one source, then you don't have options either, right? You're just beholden to the voice of the guy who's funding you.
Yeah,
Is my view.
That's one of the
I mean,
weirdest things about this whole thing. I mean, you have these products that are significantly safer, and it's public health that is going out against these. The only thing that I can think of is that there's a lot of money to be made in treating smoking and smoking-related illnesses. I was looking at some numbers in the States, and it's like in 1990, smoking was responsible for 20% of all deaths, right? And that number has not changed, even though we have so fewer people who are smoking. So it's like, what, the cigarettes get worse? I mean, they get better or something, and you have the technology, and you're not seeing pushes, on bans of the most harmful products. And I always compare it to car companies. You have like, look at California, they're mandating that all of these have to be electric vehicles, right? Because, we get that the combustion is bad for the environment. Well, what do you think combustion does to your lungs? Okay, this is not rocket science at all. And we do have also, there's not enough long-term data. E-cigarettes the modern e-cigarette came out over 21 years ago. We have long-term data. It's just amazing to kind of see all of that and just this vitriol against it.
yeah, well, I also see a lot of truth in what Clive Bates says, that it's an existential crisis for the tobacco control establishment, because if smoking or if consuming nicotine was non-deadly, then a lot of reason for this entire establishment doesn't exist. So there is some form of self-preservation kicking in there too, I think.
I like the fact that you said that WHO has become anti-industry, because that seems very clear, and their favoured groups are like that as well. But they do seem only anti-industry that's legal, because they're the best thing that's ever happened to the illicit trade, aren't they, Rex? Really?
Yeah. Well, I think US has an opportunity under the new administration to pull some strings again. I don't know, but there needs to be an overhaul at WHO at the really top levels, because the way it's being funded, the way it's become beholden to just a small select industrialist, is not doing the world any good, and it's not doing WHO's credibility any good. But it is talking with money. It's behaving exactly like tobacco industry was about 40 years ago. So uh, I think they just picked up all the tricks, and now they're trying to survive and play them back at us.
Well, we are getting towards the end, as I tell, I have to edit these, so, work smarter, not harder. What are your thoughts on the future? What do you think that we can expect this year, both in India, LMICs, and just around the globe?
Well, one trend that worries me, what's happened in Vietnam, for example, is that they've banned use, right? So this is a new form of extreme prohibition that is coming in when you're beginning to criminalize nicotine users, right? You're beginning to, and this is that same war on drugs, which failed, and a lot of lessons learned from it, and harm reduction became an integral part of drugs control or narcotics control. And I see that trend, because Maldives now has also enacted a use ban. So I'm beginning to see the word ban on use, becoming more prevalent in the global south, and I find that worrisome. With the amount of money being pushed into anti-THR, uh, uh, I can expect, or I fear that there may be more bans coming in of a similar nature. Because once you cross the line, then it just gives others or emboldens others to do the same, right? So, if Vietnam is imposing use bans, Singapore is imposing use bans, and that's becoming a common theme, then I worry about that. However, on the other hand, we know from Singapore that even though there were like it's like really heavily police state, and the fines are really hefty, but still the number of vapors are growing, because people are not going to die because someone made a policy or someone has a vested interest. So while on the one hand, I expect more bans and more extreme kind of bans to appear. I also I think that people are just going to try to live, right? Like if they smoke, and more people are going to find out, the best way that that it works is that you see someone else, who was a smoker who switched, and that they could, and so those kind of personal stories will grow as more number of people switch. So the WHO can and the Bloombergs and all that money can do whatever it wants, but people are going to vote for their health in the end. So that I think we'll have more vapors at the end of 2025 than we had, at the end of 2024. So that's for sure. So
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I know that Lindsay likes finishing these things with something positive, so I think that falls into that category nicely, I think there.
Yeah.
And I'll just put my oar in as well and say, these people who are against harm reduction can carry on in 2025 if they like being evil. We know we're on the side of the angels. We know all us people who use harm reduction products, we're on the right side of history. So I'm glad those people are still doing that, and hopefully we can have a better future as a result. And some of these evil people will one day change their ways and join the modern world. So yeah, thanks very much, Samrat. It's great to see you again, and thanks for joining us on this podcast. And I hope everyone who's watching enjoyed this, and we look forward to seeing you all again for another podcast, hopefully in a very short space of time. So from me, Martin, who's in the Consumer Centre at the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, and Lindsay, the Director of the Consumer Centre, and Samrat, thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.